Today we're going to be making some good old-fashioned milk bread, and this recipe is particularly interesting because we only need the 1 teaspoon of sugar for the yeast to rise. So other than that, we don't substitute any honey or golden syrup. It is a really low sugar bread, a very easy recipe, and you get that lovely milk flavour in it. There's no eggs. It is so simple. I'm going to start by pouring my milk into the jug and putting that in the microwave to heat up. Now you can heat your milk up on the stove, just don't go too hot because this is a mixture we are going to allow our yeast to bloom in. So once your milk has got to a warm temperature to touch, you will then put your teaspoon of sugar and your yeast. I'm then going to add my flour. So in the UK we usually use scales and grams, but I understand that a lot of other people use cup measurements. So it is 2 cups of flour or 450 grams. I will have both conversions on the blog in the description, along with all of my other recipes and measurements, so that you can always refer back to them when you come to making this recipe. This might be a new video for you because you want to make this specific bread, or you might be a follower of the channel and watch most of my videos, which I greatly appreciate both. So I am now adding my sugar and yeast as I mentioned before. The amount of times I've cooked bread with ready yeast like this and it hasn't risen because the yeast has been dead has been more times than I want to count. Even though the yeast can be new and not sat in the cupboard for a long time, it can happen. So just ensuring this step is the best way to go. Another thing to remember is that if your yeast doesn't bloom in that milk mixture with the sugar, just scrape off the yeast on the top and re-add fresher yeast on it. You don't have to waste the milk, just make sure that it is still warm enough to use. Otherwise you can probably heat it up in the microwave for a few more seconds and try again. I'm spraying my bowl with my olive oil spray, and then I will turn my dough out and fold it so that the top surface is stretched over and smooth. As we enter the colder months, your bread might take a little bit longer to rise than it would in the summer. So if that is the case, put your bread to rise in warmer places of the house. That can be by a radiator or a log burner or by an oven if the oven is on. So just try to use what you've got around you. I wouldn't recommend buying a proofing box personally. I don't think that it would be required. If it's something that you feel like you need, then try it and see how you go. You can maybe return it if you don't find it as valuable as you think, but for me, I will use what I have around me. Luckily we had the log burner on today, so I'm going to set it near the log burner, but don't go too near to that heat source because you don't want it to get too hot and not rise evenly. Once your dough has risen, you will be able to turn it out onto your surface. If you think that it will stick to the surface, just use a little bit of oil or water. I personally don't use flour. I don't like getting flour pockets in the bread, and I don't think it is needed. If you make the dough to the right consistency, like you can see here, it won't be too sticky. I'm gonna try and braid my dough today, but it was just one of those days that I just couldn't wrap my head around how to braid, which is just crazy because if I was to braid my hair I would be able to do it, but sometimes it takes a couple seconds to rethink about what I'm doing. So luckily I managed to braid it in the end, but what you do is you put 3 strands of the same size and length and pinch the tops together, and then braid them, hopefully better than I braided mine, and seal in the ends by pinching it again. You can then either leave that on a flat baking tray as it is, or put it in a bread tin. I chose to put mine in a bread tin because I wanted to get the rise for a sandwich bread. If you braid it on a flat surface, it might not rise as high, but it will be a lovely bread for cheeses and hams and snacking. I do love the colder months, but you just have to adapt in the kitchen sometimes. It is nice to have that oven on all the time again, because in the summer, as you know, sometimes it just felt really hot if you had the sun out and a hot oven in the kitchen. That's when I tended to use the stove more than I did the oven. Once your bread is braided, just pop it in your tin and allow it to rise. Again, it might take about half an hour to an hour depending on the temperature conditions in your room. I'm going to put the lid on to try and seal the heat in, but I won't be baking this bread with the lid, it won't be needed. Once it's risen to nearly about an inch to the top, I then preheat my oven and cook, and it only needs to be cooked for about 25 minutes. I didn't have any eggs, so I tried to put some sesame seeds on the top without that egg wash. I do sometimes use milk, but I thought I would just put the sesame seeds on. They didn't all need to stick, but enough stuck that I was happy with it. Does anyone here have chickens, and does anyone have any advice on owning them? I eventually want to have some chickens, but that will be when we move into a permanent place. As I've said, we are wanting to buy a homestead, hopefully in Europe or possibly Canada, depending on the visas. But for now, we are here and we are loving it. My first thing to do before we move is to get married, and that wedding planning is very hard. We're actually going to do an elopement style wedding where it will just be myself and my fiance with a photographer, and hopefully capture that ceremony. So it's not going to be too much to plan, but even so it can be quite expensive and difficult to find the right locations. Let me know if you would like to see and hear more about the wedding planning. So this is the bread, it is perfect, and you know me by now, it is slice and freeze. So I will make our sandwiches and I will put it in the freezer. I hope that you've enjoyed this recipe. It is really interesting and really fun to make, and if you make it, please do let me know. Please let me know what other recipes you'd like me to make, because I have some vegetarian recipes coming up soon. This was suggested by one of our lovely friends on YouTube who supports my channel, Almost a Green Acre, and I think it is a fantastic idea. I'm really inspired to do a vegetarian option on all of my recipes, or as many as I can, because I think that would be a lovely alternative. I hope that you enjoyed today's video, and please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.